Have you ever turned on an old radio late at night, only to hear voices that shouldn't be there? Not music, not static, but whispers calling your name. Tonight, we'll uncover the terrifying story of a man who discovered that some frequencies connect not to stations, but to the dead. It began on a cold October night, the kind of night where silence feels heavier than usual. The streets outside were quiet, only the occasional car rolling past, headlights briefly cutting through the darkness before vanishing again. Inside his small apartment, Daniel sat alone. He wasn't much of a social man. Nights like this, he usually filled with reading old books or tinkering with odd things he found at thrift stores. But tonight was different because tonight he had brought home something strange. At the back of a dusty secondhand shop, beneath broken typewriters and cracked picture frames, Daniel had found an old radio. It was heavy, with wooden sides scratched and scarred by time. Its knobs were worn smooth, its dial cloudy with age. The tag hanging from it read simply, $5 doesn't work. Daniel liked things that didn't work. He liked fixing them, bringing them back to life. Something about the challenge gave him comfort. So, without thinking twice, he paid the $5, carried it home, and set it on his desk. That's when things began. At first, it was just the normal hum of static. Daniel turned the knob slowly, the sound shifting from low hiss to sharp crackle. No stations came through clearly, just noise. Still, he felt drawn to it, as if the static itself was trying to arrange into something meaningful. Hours passed. Midnight crept closer. He should have gone to bed, but instead he leaned closer to the speaker, his ear just inches away, listening, and then he heard it, a whisper. So faint at first, he thought it was just his imagination, or maybe a trick of the static. But the longer he listened, the more certain he became. The voice was there, buried beneath the crackling. It wasn't singing. It wasn't an advertisement. It was speaking. A single word, repeated over and over, nearly lost in the noise. His name. Daniel. He pulled back from the radio, his breath catching in his throat. That wasn't possible. Radios didn't just say your name. He shook his head, laughed nervously, and told himself it was nothing. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he wanted to hear something, and his mind filled in the blanks. But when he leaned in again, there it was. Clearer this time, a whisper, soft and low, but undeniable. Daniel. The sound sent chills down his spine. He turned the knob quickly, switching frequencies, but the voice didn't go away. No matter where he tuned, the static shifted, but the whisper remained. It was following him. Panic rising in his chest, he yanked the plug from the wall. The radio went silent instantly, the glow of its dial fading into darkness. For a long moment, Daniel just sat there in his chair, staring at the lifeless box. His heart pounded. The room felt too quiet, the air too heavy. Then, just as he began to calm down, something happened that made his blood run cold. The radio turned itself back on. The dial glowed faintly again. The static roared back to life, and the voice, calm, steady, whispering, spoke once more. Daniel, I can hear you. He stumbled backward, nearly knocking over his chair. His apartment was small, but in that moment it felt like the walls were closing in. The air carried a strange pressure, like being deep underwater. He wanted to run, to leave, but his legs wouldn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the radio as though it had trapped him, and then the whisper changed. It wasn't just his name anymore. It was sentences, short, broken, but clear enough. You shouldn't have brought me home. Daniel's mouth went dry. His skin prickled with goosebumps. He had no idea what that meant. Who was me? Why was this happening? The whisper grew louder, almost urgent now. I've been waiting. So long, waiting. And now, I found you. The radio hissed, the voice dissolving back into static. Daniel stared at it, trembling, his mind racing. He thought of smashing it, throwing it out the window, anything to make it stop. But then, in the middle of the noise, the whisper returned once more. This time, it wasn't calling his name. This time, it was laughing. A low, broken laugh, stretched and distorted through the static. The sound was wrong and human, yet somehow deliberate. The kind of laugh that made your stomach twist, because you knew it wasn't coming from joy, but from something darker. Daniel grabbed a blanket, threw it over the radio, and shoved it into the corner of the room. The sound muffled, but he could still hear its static hissing voice whispering beneath. He crawled into bed, pulling the covers tight around him, but sleep didn't come. Not really. Every time his eyes closed, he swore he could hear that faint whisper in his ear, closer than before. By morning, the apartment was silent. The radio sat in the corner, dark and still, as if nothing had happened. Daniel almost convinced himself it was a dream. Almost. But then he noticed something that made his chest tighten. On the wooden desk where the radio had sat all night, carved into the surface as if by invisible hands, was a single word: listen. And Daniel realized, with growing horror, that the radio wasn't broken at all. It was working exactly as it was meant to. Daniel didn't sleep that next night. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the glowing dial of the radio and heard that whisper curling out of the static. Even though he had thrown the blanket over it, shoved it into the corner, even though it sat there looking harmless in the daylight, he couldn't get rid of the memory. The sound clung to him like smoke. All day, he kept telling himself it had to be his imagination. Radios didn't just whisper names. Radios didn't carve words into desks. He tried to focus on work, but every so often, his gaze drifted back to the corner, where the silent shape waited under the blanket. By evening, the silence of the apartment felt unbearable. The hum of the fridge, the faint ticking of the clock, everything seemed louder, heavier, pressing down on him. He told himself he'd prove it was nothing. Just an old machine making weird noises, nothing supernatural, nothing impossible. So at exactly 11:47 p.m., Daniel plugged the radio back in. The dial glowed faintly once more. The speaker crackled alive with static. Daniel sat in his chair, gripping the edges of the desk, waiting. His pulse pounded in his ears. Minutes passed. Nothing but static. Then, at exactly midnight, the voice returned. Daniel. This time, he didn't flinch. His skin still prickled, but he forced himself to stay calm, to listen. What do you want? He whispered aloud. He didn't know why he spoke. Maybe part of him wanted answers. Maybe part of him wanted to believe he was only talking to empty air. The static shifted. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the voice returned, soft but clear, to be heard. Daniel froze. The words were sharper this time, less like broken fragments, more like an actual response. He swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. Heard by who, static? Then you. The room seemed to grow colder. Daniel rubbed his arms, trying to fight off the chill. He knew he should stop. He knew this was wrong. But curiosity outweighed fear. Why me? The hiss of static stretched on, dragging seconds into what felt like hours. Finally, the whisper came again. Because you listen? Daniel sat back, trying to process. His apartment was utterly silent except for that low crackle from the speaker. No traffic outside, no neighbors, just him and it. Then the voice continued, slower now, as though choosing its words carefully. They never listened, not when I begged. Not when I screamed, not when I died. Daniel's stomach tightened. He wanted to tell himself this was just some strange radio interference, some coincidence. But no station would broadcast something like this. Who are you? He asked. The static roared suddenly, loud and violent, like a wave crashing into the room. Daniel winced, covering his ears. When the noise settled, the voice spoke again. Eleanor. The name hung in the air. Eleanor. Daniel didn't know anyone by that name. He shivered. "What do you want from me, Eleanor?" The reply came almost instantly. "Remember me." The glow of the dial flickered, dimmed, then brightened again, as if reacting to the words. The apartment seemed to shrink around him. Shadows stretched across the walls, longer, darker. Daniel tried to think rationally. Maybe this was some prank. Maybe someone nearby had a transmitter and they were messing with him, but deep down he didn't believe that. The voice had weight, emotion, pain, and then the voice whispered something that froze him completely. "They buried me where no one will find me. I cannot rest. You must help me." Daniel's heart raced. He shot up from his chair, pacing the room. No, this isn't real. I'm not doing this." He pulled the plug again, yanking the radio from the wall. The glow faded. Silence returned. But the words wouldn't leave his mind. "Buried me where no one will find me." That night, Daniel didn't sleep again. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the building making him jump. He wanted to throw the radio away, smash it to pieces, burn it. But he couldn't. Something inside him whispered that if he ignored it, if he abandoned it, things would get worse. The next day, he searched for answers. He typed Eleanor and murder into search engines. Dozens of results popped up, but none made sense. He narrowed it down. Eleanor missing body never found. Slowly, he pieced together a story. Decades ago, a woman named Eleanor Price had vanished from a nearby town. She was last seen leaving work late one night. Her body was never found. The case went cold. Daniel stared at the article, unease coiling in his stomach. The details fit too well. That night, he tried to resist plugging the radio back in. But as midnight approached, a strange pull gnawed at him, a pressure at the back of his mind. He had to know more. When the dial glowed again, the voice came almost instantly. "You looked for me?" Daniel's blood ran cold. "Yes," he whispered. "I found something, Eleanor Price. That's you, isn't it?" The static pulsed like a heartbeat. Then the voice replied, "Yes." Daniel's hand shook as he adjusted the volume. "What happened to you?" The whisper was faint, broken, but the words came clear enough. "He took me. He hid me beneath the earth. No one would listen." Daniel swallowed. "Who took you?" The radio hissed, loud and violent again, before the voice cut through. "His name is lost, but his house still stands." The walls remember. The glow of the dial flickered violently, casting eerie shadows across the room. Daniel felt the hair on his arms rise. Before he could ask more, the radio went dead. The light snapped off, the static vanished. Silence filled the apartment. Daniel sat in the dark, staring at the lifeless box. He didn't know what to do, but one thing was certain: Eleanor wasn't finished with him. And deep down, he knew he wasn't finished with her either. The next morning, Daniel woke to the sharp sting of sunlight cutting through his blinds. His head throbbed, his mouth was dry, and he realized he hadn't slept a single proper hour. All night, he had tossed and turned, haunted by Eleanor's voice. Her words clung to him like cobwebs beneath the earth. His house still stands. The walls remember. Daniel tried to tell himself he could forget. He could walk away, sell the radio, throw it into the river, pretend it never happened. But every time he thought about ignoring it, he felt that same strange pull and gnawing weight in his chest, as if something inside him needed to keep listening. By late afternoon, he gave in. Daniel drove to the local library, pulling dusty files from archives, searching through records. He found articles about old houses, forgotten estates, decaying properties in the nearby countryside. One, in particular, caught his attention: the Holloway farmhouse. It was a sprawling, abandoned house on the edge of town, boarded up for decades. Rumors said its last owner was violent, secretive. Neighbors whispered about screams in the night, missing animals, even missing people, but nothing had ever been proven. Daniel's pulse quickened as he read. The farmhouse wasn't far, just an hour's drive. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the silent radio. He hadn't plugged it back in yet. He didn't want to. But as midnight crept closer, his resolve cracked. He needed confirmation. The radio clicked alive at 11:59. Static filled the room. Daniel leaned forward. Eleanor, was it the Holloway farmhouse? For a long moment, only the hiss of static filled the air. Then faintly, the voice came. Yes, Daniel shivered. What happened there? The voice wavered, broken by bursts of static. He locked me inside the cellar, dark, cold. I never left. Daniel's chest tightened. He pressed his forehead into his hand, trying to steady his breathing. Eleanor, he whispered, if I go there, what will I find? The glow of the dial brightened, pulsed once, then dimmed. The voice came through, low and haunting. You'll find? The words left Daniel frozen. For a long time, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, without even realizing it, he nodded. I'll go. The static swelled, then cut off sharply. The dial went dark. The next day, Daniel drove out of town. The road wound through thick woods, the trees leaning overhead like watchful giants. His GPS barely worked this far out, the signal fading in and out, but after some wrong turns, he finally saw it. The Holloway farmhouse. It loomed at the end of a long dirt road, its windows boarded, its roof sagging, the paint peeling in long strips. Weeds grew tall across the yard, and the front gate leaned crooked on rusting hinges. Daniel parked and sat in the car for several minutes, staring. His chest felt tight, his hands sweaty against the steering wheel. Finally, he forced himself out. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. Each step toward the house felt heavier, like he was walking into something alive, something waiting. The front door was nailed shut, but the side entrance hung loosely, half broken. Daniel slipped inside. Dust coated every surface. The air was stale, thick with mildew. Floorboards creaked beneath his weight. He moved slowly, flashlight cutting through the shadows. The house was a maze of empty rooms, rotting furniture, broken glass, peeling wallpaper. Every corner seemed to groan under the weight of years, and then faintly he heard it. Knock. 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 His heart lurched. He froze, straining to listen. The sound came again. Knock, knock, knock. From beneath his feet, the cellar. Daniel's throat tightened. Slowly, he followed the sound, his steps echoing as he moved through the hall and found the cellar door at the far end of the kitchen. It was shut tight, a heavy wooden door with rusted hinges. As he reached for the handle, the knocking stopped. Silence. He swallowed hard and pulled. The door groaned, resisting at first, then finally creaked open. A gust of cold, damp air rushed up, carrying with it the smell of earth and something else, something rotten. The stairs descended into blackness. Daniel shone his flashlight, but the beam seemed swallowed by the dark. Still, he stepped down, 1 foot at a time, the wood groaning beneath him. At the bottom, his light swept across dirt walls, crumbling stone, old shelves. The air was freezing, and every breath he took fogged in front of him. Then his light caught something in the far corner, a mound of earth. Shaped wrong, uneven, like something had been buried there. Daniel's chest tightened. His skin crawled. He whispered aloud, his voice shaking. Eleanor? The radio wasn't here, but the air seemed to hum faintly, vibrating around him. Then, clear as if she were standing behind him, he heard her voice. Yes. Daniel spun, but no one was there. His flashlight beam shook violently across the walls. He turned back toward the mound. His knees felt weak, but he forced himself closer. Dropping the flashlight to the ground, he knelt and brushed at the dirt with trembling hands. His fingers scraped against something hard, wood, A coffin. Daniel stumbled back, gasping. His stomach turned, bile rising in his throat. He wanted to run, to flee this place, but something inside him kept him rooted. He couldn't leave. Not yet. The voice came again, low and urgent. Open it. Daniel shook his head, tears stinging his eyes. I can't. The air grew colder. The walls seemed to press in around him. Open it, the voice repeated, sharper now, almost desperate. His hands shook violently as he dug deeper, scraping away dirt, exposing the rotting wood. With a deep breath, he pried at the lid, forcing it open. Inside, the beam of his flashlight revealed what he dreaded most. Bones. A human skeleton collapsed within the coffin, wrapped in scraps of decayed fabric. A rusted chain coiled around the remains. Daniel gagged, stumbling back, hand over his mouth. The voice whispered, broken but clear. Now you see. Now you know. The walls of the cellar seemed to tremble. The air vibrated heavy, as if the house itself exhaled. Shadows danced across the walls. And for the first time, Daniel realized he wasn't alone down there. Daniel stood frozen in the cellar, his flashlight beam trembling over the rotted coffin and the tangled bones inside. The smell of damp earth and decay clung to his throat, making every breath feel like it carried death itself. His mind screamed at him to run, to get out, to never come back, but his body wouldn't move. The voice came again, threading through the icy air like a whisper in his ear. You found me. Daniel spun, his light sweeping across empty stone walls, broken shelves, and piles of dirt. Nothing, yet the voice pressed close, as if she were standing right beside him. You know the truth now. You know what he did. Daniel swallowed hard, his voice cracking as he forced out words. Why me? Why are you telling me this? Why not someone else? Silence at first. Then the reply came low, sharp, and uncheckable. Because you listened? Daniel's knees felt weak. He clutched the edge of the coffin, staring down at the chain-wrapped bones. His flashlight flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. The cellar was so cold now that his breath billowed in front of him, thick like smoke. What do you want from me, Eleanor? He whispered. The static-like hum returned, buzzing faintly through the walls, crawling into his ears. Then her voice, free me. Daniel shook his head violently. I can't, I don't know how. The hum grew louder, sharper. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the dirt walls, shifting like something alive. Burn it, Eleanor's voice said, fierce now. The chains, the box, the place he made into my prison. Burn it all. Daniel's heart pounded. His skin crawled with dread. He wanted to argue, to refuse, to insist that he wasn't the one to do this. But as the voice echoed, the air thickened with pressure, pressing down on him until he could barely breathe. He knew there was no choice. He stumbled up the cellar stairs, gasping for air. When he burst into the kitchen, the house groaned as if it had felt his discovery. Floorboards creaked overhead, doors slammed somewhere deep within. Daniel grabbed his car keys, racing outside, sucking in the cold night air. But when he looked back, his blood ran cold. The farmhouse windows, those boarded, empty windows, glowed faintly from inside. A soft, pulsing light. The next day, Daniel prepared. He went to the hardware store, bought lighter fluid, matches, and a crowbar. The cashier gave him a strange look, but Daniel didn't explain. He couldn't. That night, he returned to the Holloway farmhouse. The woods were even darker than before, the moon smothered by thick clouds. His car crunched over gravel as he pulled up to the leaning gate. The house seemed to watch him this time. Its crooked frame loomed taller, the broken windows like hollow eyes. Inside, the air was heavier. Each creak of the floorboards echoed too loud, like the house was mocking his presence. He made his way straight to the cellar. At the bottom of the stairs, the coffin waited, half buried, its lid gaping open. The bones glistened faintly in his flashlight beam. Daniel doused the coffin in lighter fluid, his hands trembling. The sharp chemical smell filled the cellar. He pulled a match, struck it, and stared at the tiny flame dancing in his hand. His stomach twisted. Then Eleanor's voice came again. "Do it!" He dropped the match. Flames leapt instantly, racing across the wood, licking at the chains. Smoke billowed thick and black, curling against the ceiling. Daniel stumbled back, coughing. But as the coffin burned, the cellar walls began to tremble. The house groaned, louder than before, shaking with rage. A violent wind whipped through the underground chamber, though there were no windows, no doors. The fire roared higher, and then a scream. Not Daniel's. It tore through the cellar, raw and inhuman, reverberating in his skull. A woman's voice anguished, furious and impossibly loud. Daniel dropped his flashlight, clutching his ears. The scream rattled the walls, shook the floor, made the air shiver. Smoke poured up the stairwell as fire consumed the coffin. Through the noise, Eleanor's whisper slipped back in, softer now, trembling like a fading breath. "Thank you." The flames collapsed inward, devouring the last of the wood. The scream ended abruptly, replaced by silence so deep it made Daniel's ears ring. For a moment, he thought it was over. But then, faintly, from the corner of the cellar, he heard something move, a shuffle, a step. His blood turned to ice. He snatched up his flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. The beam caught the far wall, where the dirt sagged and cracked. Slowly, impossibly, the shape of a hand pushed out from the soil. Pale, skeletal fingers clawed through the earth. Daniel stumbled back, nearly tripping over the ashes of the coffin. His light shook as the hand pulled further free. An arm, a shoulder. The voice returned, but it was no longer a whisper. It was deeper, guttural, wrong. "She was mine." Daniel bolted for the stairs. He ran, tripping over broken wood, scrambling up toward the kitchen. Behind him, the cellar roared with sound chains clattering, earth splitting, that guttural voice bellowing through the house. He slammed the cellar door shut just as something heavy crashed against it from below. The impact rattled the hinges, dust falling from the ceiling. Daniel pressed his back against the door, heart hammering, his chest heaving for breath. But then through the wood, through the walls, he heard it. A voice he hadn't heard before, a man's voice. "You shouldn't have listened." The entire house seemed to exhale with a low, rumbling groan. And Daniel realized with dawning horror that burning Eleanor's coffin hadn't freed her. It had freed him. The air inside the house felt heavier than ever before. Every corner seemed alive, pulsing with whispers and shadows that clung to the walls. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she held the candle tighter, its flame trembling as if it too was afraid of what was coming. She remembered the warnings scribbled in the old diary she had found. "Once the fifth night comes, the house will no longer belong to you. It will belong to them. Them, whoever they were." Sarah knew she was about to meet them. A sudden crash echoed from the hallway. She jumped, almost dropping the candle. The sound of glass shattering made her stomach twist, but when she turned, the hallway was perfectly empty. The shards of a broken vase lay scattered across the floor, but there had been no wind, no movement, nothing that could explain it. The silence after the noise was unbearable. It was too quiet, like the house was holding its breath. Then came the footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoing on the old wooden floors. Sarah froze, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The steps were slow, steady, and growing closer. "Who's there?" she whispered, though her voice barely made a sound. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, from the far end of the hallway, a shape emerged. It wasn't clear at first, just darker than the rest of the shadows, but as it moved closer, Sarah could see the outline of a tall, gaunt figure. Its face was hidden in shadow, but its eyes glowed faintly, like embers buried deep in ash. Sarah stumbled backward, her candlelight flickering violently. The figure didn't move fast. It didn't need to. Its slow, purposeful walk filled her with more dread than if it had come running. She turned and bolted into the living room. Her breath came out in ragged gasps as she pressed her back against the wall. She had to get out. She had to leave before the prophecy in the diary came true. The front door loomed ahead. She sprinted for it, her hands shaking as she grabbed the knob and twisted. It wouldn't budge. Locked. She pulled harder, slamming her shoulder against the wood, but the door felt like stone. Behind her, the floorboards groaned. She spun around, candlelight throwing long, warped shadows across the room. The figure was closer now, standing halfway between her and the hallway. Its eyes burned brighter. Then came another soft knocks, but not from the figure. From the window, Sarah's head snapped toward it. On the other side of the glass, pale faces pressed against the window pane. Dozens of them. Hollow-eyed with expressions twisted in eternal despair. Their mouths moved silently as if whispering words only the dead could hear. The candle flame sputtered. Sarah's grip tightened. "No," she whispered. One of the pale hands pressed against the glass, then another, then another. The window rattled as the faces began to push forward, their bodies straining to come through. She backed away, but the figure in the room was blocking her only exit. Suddenly, she remembered the diary again, its last page. The ink had been smeared, but one phrase had stood out clearly. "The house is a prison. The only escape is the fire." Her eyes darted to the fireplace, cold and empty for years. Her hand trembled as she reached for the box of matches on the mantel. The figure took another step forward, its eyes blazing. Sarah struck the match. The tiny flame flared to life. She hesitated for only a second, then tossed it into the fireplace. The dry wood inside caught instantly. Flames roared upward, devouring the dust and cobwebs. The fire grew unnaturally fast, spreading across the room as though the house itself had been waiting for this moment. The shadows screamed. Yes, screamed. Their wails filled the room, 1,000 tortured voices crying out in agony as the fire consumed them. The pale faces at the window melted away into darkness. The figure, still standing in the center of the room, began to writhe. Its form twisted and stretched, like smoke caught in a storm. The heat was unbearable. Sarah shielded her face, stumbling backward. The fire climbed the walls, licking at the ceiling. The house groaned, as if alive, as if it was finally breaking free of something ancient and terrible. And then silence. The figure was gone. The faces had vanished. All that remained was the sound of crackling fire. Sarah staggered toward the front door again. This time, when she grabbed the knob, it turned. The door swung open. She ran into the night, gasping for air as she collapsed onto the grass outside. Behind her, Shadowbrook Manor was an inferno. Flames devoured its walls, its windows exploding one by one. The towering silhouette burned against the midnight sky, lighting up the darkness. For a moment, she thought she heard the house scream one last time. Then it was gone, reduced to fire and ash. Sarah lay there, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with shock. She had survived. She had escaped the curse, or so she thought. As the flames died down and the night grew quiet again, she felt it. A cold breath against the back of her neck. She turned slowly, nothing, but deep down, she knew the truth. The house was gone, but the shadows were not. The curse of Shadowbrook Manor had not been destroyed. It had simply moved. And now it was with her.